Joshua Albanez, Alejandro Amaya, Yadira Bernabe, Jose Callis, Ethan Condit, Taylor Deason, Eric Diaz, Devontae, Madeline McGowan, Riley Morales, Melanie Morena, let's see, Aiden Ortiz, no. Caitlin, Javier Rios, Yasmin Reese, okay, and Samuel,
Here.
gotcha, and Emmanuel Sanchez, no Emmanuel, Tobias Zavada. All right, I believe everybody's heard their name. We've all heard our name? Okay. All right. Well, today, as always, we are going to have an awful lot to go over. Okay? Today, we're going to learn the answers to the following questions. One, what alternative to mercantilism did writers in the 1700s propose? Okay. Second question, what impact did the First Great Awakening have on American colonial society? First Great Awakening was a religious revival movement that started in America and then spread to England as well. Three, how did the French and Indian War embody the problems caused by mercantilism? We talked about two big problems last class, okay? In fact, that I'll have you folks review for me in a second. Well, the French and Indian War that took place in the 1750s and 1760s in the American colonies really embodied those problems, and we can see how those problems. We're going to have a short review. Then I'll go over the agenda here. We're going to look at a legal concept called the rights of Englishmen. And that was something that made the colonists very cognizant of their rights. And so when the British in the 1760s started violating their rights, the colonists were, hey, wait, you can't do this, okay? So it was kind of like a launching pad for colonial resistance to British authority. We're going to have a handout, a two-page handout, just called Writers of the 1700s. We've got three people. The first two are going to be criticizing mercantilism, and then the last one, John Wesley, he is a writer, he's a preacher in the First Great Awakening, and he wrote a pamphlet towards the end of the First Great Awakening condemning slavery. So we will see, we're just going to start with the first two writers there. I'm going to break you up for a little discussion. Then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the First Great Awakening, and then we will read that third writer, John Wesley. Then we're going to look at the French and Indian War. The French and Indian War is probably the most influential war in American history that most Americans have just, you may have heard the words, but you really have heard nothing about the war itself, okay? The reason why this was so influential is that the aftermath of this war basically set up the colonial protests against British misrule and the American Revolution, okay? It is very unlikely that had that war not been fought, I don't know if I'm throwing in too many negatives, but it is unlikely that if the war was never fought, we would have had the revolution, the American Revolution. So again, this war is just very, very important. I'm going to pass out a chart. We're going to zip through it. We'll have a couple of graphics, a couple of maps kind of explaining the action, okay? The war ended with the Treaty of Paris, 1763. Now, one thing you need to know about history, the French were a major country in Europe, still are, and you may have heard it said in earlier eras, French was an international language, kind of like English has been in the 1900s and so far in the 2000s. When European nations would fight these big wars, they would usually go to Paris, the capital of France, to negotiate, the end of the war. So there's a whole bunch of Treaty of Parises. Okay, they went to Paris to negotiate the end of World War I. Okay, there's a Treaty of Paris that ended the French and Indian War, 1763. There's another Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. Now that's Treaty of Paris for 1783. Okay, so you kind of have to learn to attach the year, so you can figure out what treaty they're talking about, because very often, they will just, say Treaty of Paris. So again, Treaty of Paris, 1763. And again, as I've already said, the French and Indian War kind of set the colonies and Britain up for the conflicts in the 1760s and the 1770s. We'll have a handout dealing with the events. There's a lot that goes on in the 1760s, and I'll just give you like a visual representation with one event, then an arrow that leads to that, the consequence, then another arrow. So we will see how, these events, snowballed into the revolution. Halfway through, we're going to get an excerpt from a guy named Sam Adams. He was a leader in the 1760s. Okay, he was speaking the night of the Boston Tea Party in Boston. So, he spoke to that group, and so he wrote a letter that was circulated throughout the colonies. So we will see exactly, what the colonists were upset about, okay? Then I'll assign another 400-word response. Just a reminder, okay? We talked about this last class. This is a 6-week class, so things happen really, really quickly. That essay outline is due next Wednesday, January 15th, okay? And just to clarify, somebody brought this up, and I'm glad one of you did. You don't have to write your essay outline on something we talk about that day. It's basically whatever you want your 5-page essay to be on. This is going to be like a rough draft, okay? Okay. Now, if you don't get it in by then, you can still submit it up to 7 days late for 80% credit, but it'd be good. Not only do you get full credit, but then you'll have extra time to work on your essay, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, rights of Englishmen. The rights of Englishmen. The rights of Englishmen. It's a political concept arguing that the American colonists had the same rights that they would have had they been residents of England. Okay, so this concept didn't really gain much of a following in England because they already were residents of England, but this was really big in the colonies. Okay, basically saying, hey, the fact that we or our parents, ancestors moved from England to the colonies doesn't mean we gave up any of the same legal rights we have. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, what did this mean? Well, from 1215, when the Magna Carta was signed in England in 1215 AD, the English kings have been, granting rights to the various, peoples in their realm. Okay. Magna Carta explicitly stated that the king would not arrest barons, wouldn't put them in prison or fine them without a jury of their peers convicting them. Okay, the Magna Carta basically committed the king to what they call rule by law. This won't be because, it's not like the king says, well, I can do whatever I want to because I'm a king. Well, no, under the Magna Carta, there were limits to the royal power, okay? So since 1215, the English have been told, hey, the king can't do whatever the king wants, okay? There are limits and protocols and procedures that the government has to follow, okay? Let me just give you an example, okay? I'll just read the bold print, okay? The Virginia colonial charters explicitly mention these rights. The first charter from 1606 for the colony of Virginia explicitly granted the colonists the ability, quote, to enjoy all the liberties, franchises, and immunities as if they had been abiding and born within this our realm of England. Those aren't spelling errors, that's just how they spelled back then. And so we could be a little more authentic, I reproduced that. I didn't modernize the spelling, okay? But you don't have to go, gee, my history teacher's an idiot, doesn't even know how to spell England. Well, no, that's just the original text, okay? So again, the first charter, which is explicitly say, okay, we're gonna have a colony in Virginia, these are gonna be the ground rules, and it stated, hey, if you go out to Virginia, if you leave England, cross the Atlantic, you're not losing all your legal rights. You keep all the rights you had as if you had been in England, okay? Now, charter, 3 years later, they rewrote the rules, so they had a new charter, included similar language. The Charter of 1612 reserved for the colonists of Virginia the same, quote, liberties, franchises, and immunities that were mentioned in the former charter. So again, even when they rewrote the rules to these colonial charters and had new charters, made, they still included that language, okay? Now, I just kind of pointed out Virginia. There's other colonial charters out of Connecticut, Maryland, okay, same thing. Okay, let's go ahead and, I don't think we're going to cover First Continental Congress today, but this met in 1774, and at this point, we were on the brink of revolt. Continental Congress were delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies that met in Philadelphia to discuss policy and opposition, okay? So during the First Continental Congress, okay, they declared that, quote, our ancestors who first settled these colonies were at the time of their emigration from the mother country entitled to all the rights, liberties, and immunities of free and natural born subjects within the realm of England, that by such emigration they by no means forfeited, surrendered, or lost any of those rights, okay? So, this rights of Englishmen wasn't something that Ben Franklin and George Washington pulled out of a hat and said, oh, this will be the pretext that we're, protesting or something like that. No, this concept was embedded in the colonial history. It was promised to the colonists in their charters. And then again, First Continental Congress, the body that was presenting or representing the colonists to England, explicitly mentioned, hey, we need to remind you that, we have got the same rights that the English do, and, we didn't give any of them up just by migrating to the colonies, okay? All right. All right. Now let's shift gears. Oh, wait a second. I forgot to do that little review, okay? Can somebody answer the first question? What definition of mercantilism was presented to the class on Monday? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Maybe too confident? Okay, yeah.
The definition of mercantilism is an economic relationship between two regions. One region being the mother country that exports its manufactured finished goods, such as fish to its colonies, the other region being the colony that imports the raw materials, natural resources, such as wood to the mother country.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. that was good, all right? So you have the mother country sends out a colony, and then you have the colony, which receives, is ruled by the mother country and receives, people from the mother country, okay? And the policies, the two big policies, there was an awful lot stated about mercantilism. I've given you kind of like the most relevant, impactful things. There's other positions on gold and wealth, et cetera, but we don't need to worry about that. But again, the two big policies, a country said, okay, we're going to use colonies, okay, and then we are going to have these colonists in their new colony produce raw materials and ship them back, preferably as cheaply as possible, to the mother country. Mother country will either consume those raw materials or take them and work them into manufactured goods and then sell the manufactured goods back to the colonists, okay? If you remember, we started out this concept of mercantilism with a little bit of a discussion about what goods brought the most money. And I kind of brought out the idea that manufactured goods will make the most money for a country. So that explains why the mother country wanted to sell manufactured goods to its colonists. The whole reasons why the colony existed, okay, it was to make money for the mother country, okay? So they wanted to buy the raw materials as cheaply as possible. And if you remember, when we looked at that Navigation Acts chart, one of the Navigation Acts told the American colonists that they could only sell certain raw materials to England. And that basically, helped to push down the price, because the Americans knew they couldn't bargain with the Spanish or the French or the Dutch. They just had to sell them to England, so England could buy them a little cheaper. Okay, so that pushed America into a mercantilist relationship, because they had to sell those cheap raw materials to England, and then there were also restrictions on what manufactured goods the colonists themselves could make. Another one of those Navigation Acts said, you guys can't build any more iron and steel plants. And that was designed to limit the production of iron and steel goods in the colonies. So if the colonists needed more iron and steel stuff, they didn't make it themselves, they had to buy it from England. There was one other aspect of mercantilism that wasn't touched on yet.
And also mercantilism,
Mhm.
it exploits the small colonies. It benefits, like you say, the smaller nations, how they exploit through natural like indigo and sell it for more. And also it creates a lot of, like you say, a lot of tariffs. They
Tariffs.
it just benefits, basically, like you say, the stronger nations that led to colonialism, like modern, kind of like in a sense of slavery too. It does create jobs for other, but it always benefited the powering nations
Yeah.
that led
Yeah, the
to.
mother country. The
Yeah,
mother
that,
country was
yeah.
the one that sent out the colony. Okay, you mentioned tariffs. That was the other policy I wanted to touch on, okay? If you remember, that mercantilism chart had like a thick line, in between France and England. That thick line represents tariffs. The English didn't want to have France export to England, so they placed tariffs on French goods. And a tariff is what, anybody? What's a tariff? Yes.
A tax on any imported goods.
Yes, a tax on imported goods. So, because England didn't want to import French goods, they could simply ban them, okay? And occasionally they would, but usually they would just place a tariff, which was a tax. And the reason why you would impose a tax on foreign imports was that that tax would make those goods more expensive, okay? And then your own customers in England would look at these French goods and they'd be real expensive because of the tariffs. So they would say, I'm not gonna pay £5 for that, I'm gonna, take my money and buy these locally made English products that don't cost that much, okay? All right. Okay, let's, one last thing I mentioned, couple of the problems that mercantilism brought about. And again, the mercantilist writers who were talking about this stuff weren't really big on war, okay? They really weren't, but the fact is that these policies impelled nations to go to war against each other. So, I'm not trying to say these mercantilists were bloodthirsty or anything, but the policies they were advocating absolutely, contributed to more war. More warfare when you were creating colonies. You're going around the world. You're, conquering the people who are already there. And then also warfare between the different colonial powers. Okay. Okay. So the first two writers we're going to see are arguing against mercantilism. Okay, so the top of the page here, writers of the 1700s against mercantilism and slavery. This first writer is David Hume. He is most known as a philosopher than an economist, but he did write a couple of pamphlets on economics. Okay, all right. So can I have somebody grab paragraph A? Read it out loud. Thank you.
Our jealousy and our hatred of France are without bounds. These passions have occasioned innumerable behaviors and expressions upon commerce. But what have we gained by the bargain? The French market for our woolen manufacturing. They transferred the commerce of wine to Spain and Portugal. There we buy worse liquor at a higher price. If we were to lay aside prejudice, it would not be difficult to prove that nothing could be more advantageous. Each new acre or vineyard planted in France in order to supply England with wine would make it necessary for the French to take the procedure of an English acre sown in wheat or barley in order to subsist themselves.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Okay, he's actually making a lot of points. Okay, this is a map. We have Britain here. Okay, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, Great Britain. We have France, we have Spain, and then Portugal. Okay, so David Hume, he is an English writer, and he's writing to an English public. And he says, we, in England, suffer from a jealousy and a hatred of the French. The English and the French, by the 1700s, had been fighting big wars against each other for a good 700 years. Okay? In 1066, William the Duke of Normandy, this Normandy Peninsula here, invaded and conquered England. And then from 1066 onward, that meant the English kings had land in France, and then the French kings were saying, wait a second, if you're a king in England, we don't want you controlling French territory. So there was a bitter, long struggle against the English and the French, and it was continuing. So in the 1700s, David Hume says, we in England, we hate the French because every generation we go to war against them. And, David Hume says, our hatred of the French has occasioned innumerable barriers and obstructions upon commerce. Commerce just means trade. So a barrier or an obstruction would be like a tariff or a ban. Okay, so because the English hate the French, they have a lot of tariffs on French imports or just an outright ban. Okay, now he asks a very significant question at the end of the second line here. What have we gained by the bargain? Hume is saying, we hate the French and we want to get them, we want to punish them. So we refuse to buy their stuff. That's one way the people in England can punish the French. We're not going to buy their stuff. But Hume is saying, how does this affect us? Let's not worry about the French. Let's just look how it affects us. We lost the French market for woolen manufacturing. So in other words, in England, they had a lot of woolen clothing made. They would shear the sheep, spin that into wool and turn that into clothing and then sell it. The English, like I said, in the 1800s, made it to the top of the pile worldwide in terms of national wealth by exporting clothing. But he was saying, because we won't buy stuff from the French won't buy stuff from us. So one of the biggest, richest countries in Europe won't buy our clothes. And so we're losing out, okay? So he says, we lost the French market for woolen manufacturers. Okay, transferred the commerce of wine to Spain and Portugal. So instead of buying French champagne or French wine, okay, again, remember, the English are trying to hurt the French, so they have tariffs and bans. So the English say, okay, fine, we're not gonna buy your wine. And the French, have been long renowned for making quality wine, okay? And if you haven't heard, you used to have champagne made in many different parts of the world, but the French got mad and said, no, true champagne has to come from the Champagne region of France. And I don't know exactly where the Champagne region of France is, but if the grapes don't come from there, you can't call it champagne. You have to call it something like sparkling wine or sparkling something, So anyways, again, the French, England is saying, David Hume is saying, we're no longer buying their wine, so now we transfer the market to Spain and Portugal. We buy Spanish and Portuguese wine, okay? Now, let's look at what David Hume says about it. What does Hume say about wine that the English are buying from Spain and Portugal? Yeah.
It's worse if it's a higher price.
Exactly. It's a worse product. He said, we actually like the French wine better, okay? So, not only are we putting up with a worse product, but it's more expensive, okay? So Hume is basically saying, wait a second. We have these mercantilist tariffs and bans on French imports because we think we're gonna stick it to the French. We think we're gonna punish them, and you might think, well, how does not buying from the French hurt the French? Well, it means the French get less money. They're not making as much money off, trade with England, so it would hurt the French by keeping them a little bit poorer than they otherwise would be. But David Hume is saying, wait a second. We were trying to hurt the French, but we're actually hurting ourselves, okay? Because we can't export woolen clothes to France because they're not gonna buy them, okay? And when we try to import wine, instead of enriching the French, we go here, but the Spanish and Portuguese wine is more expensive and we don't like it as much. So Hume is saying, what's wrong with this picture? We think we're actually hurting the French, but we're hurting ourselves even more so. Okay, now, he basically says, the last section, okay? If England would reverse those bans and obstructions upon commerce, if England would tell the French, okay, we're gonna buy your stuff, okay? We'll go ahead and buy your wine because we like it. It's better, and it's cheaper, so we'll buy it. Hume is saying, what would the French have to do? Well, if the French are gonna keep all their current customers and also sell more wine to the English, they would have to plant more vineyards in France, wouldn't they? Because of course, everybody wants to keep their current customers and everybody, so the French would have to take some farmland that currently grows wheat for the French and convert it to vineyards. Now you might think, why would they do that? Well, wine is a luxury product, and acre for acre, you're going to make more money, producing wine and selling it than the same acre devoted to wheat. So the French are okay. If the English are willing to buy their wine, the French will then, convert some of their farmland that grows grain or wheat, they'll convert that to vineyards so they can cultivate grapes and make more wine. But the problem with that now, the French are okay because now if they were to trade with England, they would make more wine and ship it to the English. So they're okay with that. But the problem now is the French are growing less wheat. And so Hume is saying the ships that carry French wine to England would buy English wheat and then, take that back to France. So Hume is saying, instead of two nations mad at each other, why don't we start buying more from them and they would buy more from us? and, we'd be richer, the French would be better off, we would have cheaper wine at a lower cost, we could sell more woolen clothes, we could sell more grain to the French, so, Hume is saying basically, this idea of tariffs, basically hurts the country that imposes these tariffs, okay? And, again, very often the reason for imposing tariffs is a good one, okay? The ultimate goal is good. And I know a lot of people think, okay, well, in the modern day, people think, okay, well, let's just, have high tariffs on imports and we'll just buy American. And the reasoning is good. The motives of people are very, they want to promote jobs in America. They want to strengthen the American economy. Those are good goals, okay? But the point Hume is making is that that's generally a bad way to accomplish your goal. It's fine to have good goals, okay? But we need to think about, okay, will these policies help us accomplish these goals or not, okay? Okay, so that is David Hume. The next writer we're going to get is Adam Smith, okay, 1776. He wrote a big book. My copy is 1,200 pages, okay? Wealth of Nations, I'm not going to make us read 1,200 pages. We're just going to read a few paragraphs, okay? All right, let me read the italics, and then these next two paragraphs from Smith will answer them, okay? So again, the bold print excerpts from Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, 1776. How did Smith distinguish A, countries that had colonies, from B, countries that didn't? What one thing did the mother countries, quote, enjoy, end quote, as a result of acquiring a colony? Okay, can somebody grab that first paragraph under B? Okay.
The countries which possess the colonies of America and which trade directly to the East Indies enjoy the whole show and splendor of this great commerce. Other countries, however, notwithstanding all the invidious restraints by which it is meant to exclude them, frequently enjoy a greater share of the real benefit of it. The colonies of Spain and Portugal, for example, give more real encouragement to the industry of other countries than to that of Spain and Portugal. After all the unjust attempts, therefore, of every country in Europe to engross to itself the whole advantage of the trade of its own colonies, no country has yet been able to engross to itself anything but the expense of supporting in time of peace and of defending in time of war the oppressive authority which it assumes over them. The inconveniences resulting from the possession of its colonies, every country has engrossed to itself completely. The advantages resulting from the trade it has been obliged to share with many other countries.
Okay, let's unpack this, all right? The first paragraph under section B, the countries which possess the colonies of America. So here he's talking about this orange part is a dark orange would be Spain's colonies, okay? Brazil, this part was a colony of Portugal, and then the green part would be British colonies, and then the pink up here, the French. Okay, so those are the colonial powers there. Now he said they have the show and splendor. Okay, those are interesting words to describe these big colonial powers that had garrisons and bases and colonial governors and whatnot. He said it's show and splendor. He said it's like a parade, okay? Instead of, having a big army fighting a war, you've just got, a parade. He says it's a show and it looks good. But he says that's basically all you get when you have colonies is you look big and powerful because you've got colonies. You've got these bases and you have a naval fleet that goes and patrols and you appoint the colonial governor and your country feels big and important. But he says, if you look at the economics of it, it's really not helping you out, okay? He says, other countries frequently enjoy a greater share of the real benefit, okay? And then he says, Spain and Portugal don't benefit from their Spanish and Portuguese colonies as much as other countries do, okay? Well, you might think, well, wait a second, you know, how could this be? How could other countries benefit from your own colony? If you're in a country, you're in a mother country, you set out and carve out a colony, how could other countries benefit? Well, keep in mind something we talked a little bit about, smuggling. Okay, I mentioned smuggling trials, and that was why one of the navigation acts we looked at, the British established a Vice Admiralty Court. There was a lot of smuggling, okay? And what this meant was, even though, you know, Great Britain here wanted the 13 American colonies just to trade with Britain, there was smuggling going on, okay? In fact, during the Revolutionary War, there were millions and millions of Spanish pesos, Spanish silver dollars floating in the American colonies. We had done so much smuggling with the Spanish that it was kind of like, you know, an unofficial currency, okay? In fact, the US dollar in the 1790s was defined in terms of its silver content, not as equal to 1 British pound, but it was defined to be of the same value as the Spanish peso, okay? Because we were doing so much trade with Spain and Latin America, it just made sense to have American silver dollars of the same, you know, silver content and weight as the Spanish peso, so that way, you know, you could, you know, you didn't have to worry about how much is $1 worth in peso, you know, you can just even, it was an even exchange because they all had the same amount of silver, okay? So through smuggling, you would think that Spain would be the one benefiting from its colonies, but it was actually, you know, benefiting, the colonists would buy goods from other countries, yeah.
And do you think Spain like had so much colonies because they had just started exploring earlier than Great Britain or France, the French?
Yes, that's exactly why. These colonies were carved out in the early 1500s, okay? Cortez conquered the Aztec Empire in central Mexico, and then the Spanish conquistadors in the like 1530s and 40s took down the Inca Empire in modern day Peru, okay? So yeah, the Spanish got a head start. So that was why they had a huge, you know, huge territory, you know. Okay, in fact, again, smuggling was one way that other countries would benefit. Another way simply was, let's look at one thing that Spain loved about having Mexico and Peru, they both had lots of silver. Now, if somebody today, you know, discovers a new vein of silver somewhere, it's not going to be earth-shattering news, okay? Silver is just one precious mineral. It's still used, but it's not that big a deal, okay? But back then, that was what they made coins out of. In fact, even until the 1960s, we had like a silver dollar and silver and a half dollar. In the 60s, we just decided to put in cheaper metals because the silver cost too much. But back in the 15, 16, 1700s, if you wanted to mint a dollar, you had to put in a dollar's worth of silver in it, okay? So you needed silver. So when Spain realized that there were silver mines in the central Mexico and then also in the Andes Mountains, that was like, they looked at that as if the whole country won the lottery, okay? Because literally, I mean, you are taking silver out of the ground, and the Spanish would have a royal mint right next to the mine where that silver would be turned into coins. And then they would ship galleons, these massive ships loaded with silver coins to Spain, and they would ship other galleons to the Philippines where they would buy stuff from China, okay? So Spain was thinking, man, it's like the whole country won the lottery, okay? They have very lucrative silver mines. One historian has estimated 90% of the silver in circulation at the time came from Spain's colonies. 90% of the silver throughout the whole world, okay? These were very lucrative mines, okay? Now, again, Spain think, oh, this is great. It's like the whole country won the lottery, okay? So they've got ships fully loaded, filled with silver coins coming back to Spain, okay? So you might think Spain is just gonna be full of wealth, okay? Well, not necessarily, okay? A little economics lesson here. I don't know if you're familiar, if you remember the COVID relief stimulus bills. Basically, Trump signed one, and then Biden, when he came in office, signed bigger ones. And what that did, it basically created money and got everybody in the country, put money in the hands of not just people, people like you and me, but, they also gave money to corporations, okay? But I mean, there was some very good reasons for that, because unemployment was going up. But the point I'm trying to make is when everybody gets, $1,000 check, $600 check, this and that, they're gonna go out and spend it. What's gonna happen to prices? What did happen to prices? They went up, okay? And there were, other people saying, hey, we need to kind of put the brakes on these COVID stimulus because it's just gonna cause a lot of inflation, okay? People kind of ignored that, and so prices went up. Just imagine if everybody in the Victor Valley won a $100,000 lottery. What would happen to car prices when we all took those lottery checks and went down to the auto center off the 15 freeway to buy one of those cars, from the dealers over there? If everybody in the Victor Valley won a $100,000 lotto, you better believe the car dealerships would be raising their prices, okay? Yeah, it's what they call the supply and demand. If you have more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, the prices are gonna rise, okay? So you're really not that better off. So this happened to Spain. Ships full of silver coins entered Spain, and the country initially thought, oh, this is great, we won the lottery, Well, what happened was when all this silver flooded the Spanish economy, prices of Spanish goods just started to skyrocket, okay? Just like what happened in America during COVID, okay? So what happened was the Spanish looked around and said, man, stuff in Spain costs so much. It's just cheaper if we buy imports. So that's what the Spanish did, okay? And so basically, a huge amount of Spanish silver entered Spain and then went to the French and the British and to other countries that were willing to make stuff and then sell it to the Spanish consumers. Because again, the Spanish were struggling with high inflation, so imports were considered a lot cheaper. So the money that Spain thought is gonna make us a rich and powerful country, it did come into Spain, but it also, left Spain. So Adam Smith is saying, Spain really, they have the show and splendor. Give me 1 minute. They have the show and splendor of being a major, powerful country. Okay, they've got a big territory, they've got big colonies, but in reality, it's just the show and splendor. Other countries are benefiting more from, the silver coming in than Spain was. Okay, is there a question or a comment or?
Why do you think it was so important to them to do this?
Well, a couple of reasons. Historically, this is just what countries have done to each other, okay? They organize armies and they attack and pillage each other, okay? That's what, in fact, it wasn't until 1492 that the Spanish actually were fully independent from North Africans who'd come over in the Middle Ages. This is just what you did. If you've got a small kingdom, you try to conquer another small kingdom and make your kingdom bigger, So just banding together and then going to war and attacking somebody else, this is just what peoples have done. Now, another answer would be, overall, Europe was benefiting from this trade. There was a lot of increased trade between here and the colonists, so Europe was benefiting. I'm not trying to say Europe was poor because of this, okay?
Human ambition.
Human ambition was part of it, yeah. But a second reason was that throughout all this stuff, there was trade going on, and that meant nations were getting richer off the trade. You're not gonna trade if you're not benefiting from it in some way, okay? So I'm not trying to say, mercantilism is bad because of the foreign trade, no. But what these two writers, like Hume and Smith, are trying to say is, hey, we can get the benefits of trade, the benefits of mercantilism, the good things about it, which are trading and increasing wealth, without the negatives, okay? The negatives being war to carve out these colonies against the colonial peoples, and then war between the different colonial powers, okay? So, there was a benefit to this whole mercantilism thing, which was trade, but these guys are trying to say, you know what? If we, rethink how we're doing, we can get the benefits of mercantilism, which is increased wealth and increased trade, without the negatives, which is war, okay? Now, and when I talk about the mercantilists, because I'm kind of hammering away at the downside, I don't want you to think that these mercantilists were like greedy, horrible people sacrificing black cats on every Friday the 13th, or whatever. As far as mercantilism goes, if you look back in history, they were probably like on a higher moral level, because instead of saying, let's just invade a country and just pillage and plunder everything they have, or let's sponsor these pirate raids and just attack and pillage, the mercantilists were saying, let's go ahead and trade. Okay, so they were kind of like on a higher moral level than just outright conquest, pillage and plunder, or like a pirate raid, which is plundering a ship. But the point I'm making is that tariffs and colonies involved war, even though they were kind of saying, we don't really want it, but the policies set them up for more war. Okay, so again, these mercantilists, it was better than just pillaging and plundering, because at least under mercantilism, you have people working and making and buying and selling, but there still is the war at the end of the day.
Not to veer too far off, but that did kind of happen though, right? At the beginning of these explorations, like when England went over to the Americas, and the Native Americans were they got into war. There was a lot of massacres going on, and then when Spain went to Mexico and the Inca Empire, that did happen though at the beginning, right? Or no?
You mean like mercantilism or wars?
Wars.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then eventually they got to a mercantilism mindset where they were like, okay, we don't want to have so much war and so much.
Yeah, I'm kind of throwing a lot out here. Yes, the wars absolutely happened, and you wouldn't have had colonies formed without wars, okay? Because peoples aren't just going to say, oh, sure, you show up and you can have our country, and we'll just, so the mercantilist writers that were encouraging, the European kings to export more, export manufactured goods, all I'm saying is that they weren't, war hawks. They were simply trying to get their countries to make more money by selling manufactured goods, okay? But what I'm saying is that you aren't going to have mercantilism without the wars. It's going to go hand in hand.
And since they were kind of humanitarian, they were wanting more peace, you feel? At that point, or no?
Not the kings and the colonial governors, no. Maybe a few writers might have said, hey, we need to have more peace in this world, but the colonial governors, there were a lot of brutalities, maybe peace as long as the colonists are just doing their work and paying their taxes, but if what you mean is everybody's going to get along and we're all going to respect each other, not necessarily, Okay, we made it through one paragraph of Smith.
Professor, what's the difference between hyperinflation and inflation?
Well, hyper just means a high amount.
All right.
Hypertension, you're really tense, Hyperinflation, normal inflation would be like 5-10% a year.
All right, 5.
Hyperinflation, there's no official line.
All
but
right.
It's like when prices are like 20, 30, 100% a year, when they're just going through the roof.
So there's really like what's the boundary line? You say
Well,
just
there's not an
there's
official
not?
line. Where
All
like
right.
19% is just regular inflation, but 20 is hyperinflation. It just means
Alright.
more inflation.
Good looking.
Yeah, you know. Okay. Now, the second paragraph in section B, that was read, okay? Smith is saying, okay, when it comes to colonies, no country has been able to engross itself anything but two things: the expense of supporting in time of peace and of defending in time of war your colony. So Smith is saying, if you really want colonies, think about what you're signing up for. In peacetime, you're gonna pay to support your colonies. How does that happen? Well, the mother country pays for all the colonial governors, okay? And the Spanish would pay to support the viceroys that would be sent out from Spain to govern. And then, of course, if you're gonna have a naval patrol, you're gonna need a navy for, to try to crack down on smuggling. In case there's a war, you're gonna need ships to defend your colonies. You're gonna need soldiers in a base, and forts. So it's going to cost, okay? In peacetime, it's going to cost you. And this is one thing the British found with the 13 American colonies. They were always paying more to govern the 13 colonies than they were getting back in taxes. Okay? Now, that's just in peacetime. War, okay, your expenses go sky high. Because you have colonies, you want to make sure in a war your enemies don't seize the colonies. So you're going to double up the number of ships that are patrolling and protecting your colonies. You're going to double the number of soldiers in your forts so they can defend if somebody does land a force and attack. So in war, the cost of the colonies skyrockets. Okay? So Smith is saying the benefits of having a colony, everybody benefits from. If England goes out and colonizes these 13 American colonies, it's not just the English economy, because the Americans are going to do smuggling, so they're going to buy stuff from the French and the Spanish. So the benefits of a colony, all the countries enjoy, but the costs of your colony, you as the mother country are the only one who's paying the cost, okay? Because again, your colonists, whether you like it or not, they're going to be smuggling, and they're going to buy stuff from other countries. But when it comes to protecting, sending out naval forces and armies and governors to defend and govern these colonies, you as the mother country are the only one paying for that. It's kind of like you all go to Red Robin and have, I don't know if they have bottomless fries anymore. They used to a while ago. Maybe they may, I don't know if they still do? All right, some things haven't changed. Good. You go to Red Robin, get one of those nice burgers and bottomless fries and whatever. And then at the end of the meal, you and all your friends gorge yourselves and you're stuffed and you're going into a food coma. So you've all had the good stuff, but at the end of the meal, you're the one left with the tab, and everybody else just leaves you with the tab, and you have to foot the bill for everybody else's good time. So that's what Adam Smith is saying, okay? The benefits of having a colony increase foreign trade, all the European countries are getting, but when you're a mother country and you govern, you're the one who has to supply the negatives, all the costs, okay? So I didn't include this here in this excerpt we're gonna go over, but Adam Smith, in another section, told his readers that if England can't get America to pay these taxes, he said, you should just let the colonists be independent. He said, it's not gonna be worth it fighting another big war with the colonists if, already, we paid too much to govern and defend in wartime these colonies, and now they don't want to pay any more taxes. He says it's better just to cut them loose, give them their independence. Okay, so that was remarkable. The fact that a writer in England, and this book came out in 1776, which is when the Declaration of Independence was published. That year, Adam Smith writes a big book telling England, hey, we're probably going to be better off just giving the Americans their independence. Okay, that's kind of what an unpopular opinion. I don't think too many people in England would have, been happy to have read that, okay? But in point of fact, that would have been the best policy, okay? What the British did was refused to give us independence, and they fought a real big expensive war, which they ultimately lost, and they had to give us independence anyways. So Smith is saying, instead of fighting all these wars, why don't people just, grant more independence, and then we can just do this trading voluntarily. We don't have to have tariffs. We can just have all this foreign trade, so the different countries can enjoy the benefits of mercantilism, which is the increased trade without the wars. Question?
Do you ever think that, Britain, at the time, that they regretted going to war with the colonies?
Okay, do I think that?
Do you think that Britain at the time, that they ever regretted going to war with the colonies?
Oh, regretted?
Because of how much money it cost to the game, the fact that they lost?
There were some who, in Parliament, who were making speeches against the war effort, but most of the people in Parliament were in favor of fighting the American Revolution. It wasn't just King John, King George III. A lot of people in Parliament supported. After the war, possibly they may have, said, well, this is dumb, we wanted you Americans to pay taxes, and so we fought a big expensive war, now we lost the war anyways, and, some may have, but again, the war effort had a lot of support in British Parliament. So, maybe in retrospect, after the war, they might have said, why did we do this again? Okay. All right, let's skip section C. And let's go and turn the page, and we will do one more paragraph of Adam Smith. Okay, section D here. Can I have somebody grab that?
To give the monopoly of the home market to the produce of domestic industry and any particular art or manufacture, it is in some measure to direct private people in what manner they ought to employ their capitals, and must in almost all cases be either a useless or a hurtful regulation. If the produce of domestic can be brought there as cheap as that of foreign industry, the regulation is evidently useless. If it cannot, it must generally be hurtful. It is the maxim of every prudent master of the family, never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. The tailor does not attempt to make his own shoes, but buys them from the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not attempt to make his own clothes, but employs a tailor. The farmer attempts to make neither the one nor the other, but employs those different
Artificers, yeah. That's an archaic word. We don't normally, it just means like a workman, a craftsman. Okay, the first sentence there, to give the monopoly of the home market, that happens when you raise a tariff. If you raise tariffs, when England raised tariffs on French products, and people didn't buy French products, people in England didn't buy them, that was kind of like giving the monopoly of domestic production, okay, of the home market. So you would give people in England a monopoly by making the French price products so high and expensive that the people in England would just want to buy English products. So that's what he's saying. You give the English producers a monopoly. Okay. He says it's either useless or hurtful. Okay. Now he says, look, if England can make stuff in England cheaper than the French can make it and then ship it to England, he said, you don't really need a tariff because the English products are going to be cheaper. So, English customers are going to want to prefer English products. I mean, that's just everywhere around the world. Whatever country you go to, the people in that country would prefer to buy stuff made in their own country, because everybody wants to support their own country and their own industry, okay? Americans want to buy American, Canadians want to buy Canadian, people in Japan want to buy Japanese. I mean, that's just, so, you know, he is saying, if we can make something cheaper than the French, we don't need a tariff, because the English customers are naturally just gonna want to buy the cheaper English product. So he says you don't really need that tariff. Now, on the other hand, if the French product is a lot cheaper than the English product, okay, Smith is saying it would be harmful, because England would be better off buying the cheaper import and then having people in England focus on making stuff they do really well, like growing wheat or making woolen clothes, and then selling those to the French, okay? So Smith is saying tariffs are either gonna hurt because you don't need them, or you actually do need cheaper imports, but you're just gonna make things more expensive for yourself. His image here, a tailor will make clothes, okay? A shoemaker makes shoes, and then a farmer grows food. Now, Smith is saying your tailor is just gonna do the one thing the tailor does best, which is make clothes and sell them, okay? The tailor isn't gonna try to make shoes. The shoemaker is gonna have a workshop that's set up for cutting, you know, making, you know, stitching up those leather, you know, bits to each other and getting the soles and the laces. Well, you know, your shoemaker is going to be expert at making shoes, so that's what your shoemaker is going to want to do all day. Shoemaker's not going to want to also make clothes. The farmer is going to grow food, and then everybody does what they do best. They sell their product, and then they take the money, and then the tailor will then buy some shoes and buy some food, okay? But instead of having 3 people all do everything, you can just imagine, okay? If you have a computer expert in IT, you have an automobile mechanic, and you have an English teacher, okay? Probably all 3 of those people are gonna be better off just focusing on doing the one thing they do best. And then, you know, going and buying your computer from somebody else, and then buying, you know, getting your car repaired by somebody else, okay? If all 3 of those people try to do all their own, you know, make their own computers, and she would, do their own car repairs, and then, what would be everybody doing their own English? I don't know, okay? Maybe I need to use another metaphor there, but anyway, again, it's gonna be really time consuming. You know, if you aren't a mechanic and you've never done this before, you go ahead and try to change a timing belt on your car, it's just you're gonna end up with a bunch of car parts in your garage and a car that isn't running. Weeks later, it's still gonna be frustrated. Sometimes it's better just to do your one job, okay, and then take that paycheck and then pay a mechanic, okay? Just like the mechanic is probably gonna wanna work on cars all day and not gonna want to, you know, spend half the time working on cars and then half the time trying to assemble, you know, their own computer, okay? You know, maybe a better way is, let's just say we have a Wall Street attorney who makes $600 an hour doing attorney stuff, okay? Arguing in court, maybe talking to clients, they, you know, bill you every 15 minutes, that sort of thing. $600 high-powered attorney in Wall Street. If you are that person, or let's just imagine somebody else, okay? What is gonna be the best day for that Wall Street attorney making $600 an hour? Should she work the entire day, make $600 an hour from the first day she sets foot in office till the day she leaves? Or should she spend the entire morning doing secretarial skills, doing, you know, responding to emails, setting up meetings, doing other things? No. If you can make $600 an hour doing legal stuff, you do your lawyer stuff, and you make $600 a day from 8 a.m., you know, to 5 p.m. or whenever the lawyer gets off for the day, okay? Then you need secretarial things to be done. You need communications. You need emails and appointments set up. You pay somebody else a little bit less than $600 an hour to do to be in the office, okay? So you're gonna be better off not trying to do everything your own, but just do the one thing that you do best, and then you buy services or goods, you know. So That's basically the idea here, okay, of Adam Smith, is saying just have nations focus on what they do best, and then they can be better at that, and then sell their goods, and then, you know, buy other things, okay? Now, one thing that, you know, people who are against tariffs think, okay, well, I'm sorry, people who are in favor of tariffs will think, well, wait a second, if we lower our tariffs, you know, we're just gonna be flooded with cheap imports. But, you know, how would we sell our products? We would, you know, just get thrown out of work. Well, the scenario for lowering tariffs that American presidents have followed for decades now, is the right way, is you go to a foreign country and you negotiate what they call a free trade agreement, okay? You say, look, we in America, we wanna lower our tariffs against your country's products, but we want you to lower your tariffs against our products in America. So when America lowers tariffs against Mexico and Canada, Mexico and Canada also lower tariffs against American products, and so there's more trade between the three countries, okay? So that's what happened. In the 1980s, we signed a free trade agreement with Canada, and then Reagan negotiated that. He was president in the 80s, and then he said, now he didn't get to see this, but he said, ultimately, I want a free trade zone not just with America and Canada, but across all of the Americas. And so the next step was to bring Mexico in, and then in 1994, Mexico was brought into that free trade agreement, and it got a new name, what they called NAFTA, North America Free Trade Agreement, okay? So again, under a free trade agreement, yes, America lowers tariffs against foreign countries, but those countries also lower their tariffs on our products. So we do buy more stuff from the other country, but we also sell more stuff to that same country. So it's not like, you know, we're just flooded with cheap imports that, you know, make everybody in America unemployed, you know. So, again, the concerns that people who want high tariffs, the concerns they have are very good. They want to promote American jobs, they want to strengthen the American economy. Those motives are good. I'm glad we have people concerned about that. My point is simply that raising tariffs is usually not a good way to go about doing it. Now, just because I've said that, there are two countries right now on the international stage that are bad actors, Russia and China, that I'm in favor of, you know, sanctions and tariffs against. But all the other countries, I think, we would promote more harmony and goodwill and cooperation by lowering tariffs, you know, and then, again, we import more from them, but we also export more to them, okay? All right. Now, okay, I went into my settings, but evidently what I changed didn't keep that screen from. Okay. All right, I'll have to find out how to fix that so it doesn't black out on me. All right, so we looked at mercantilism in our last class. We looked at an alternate, which is kind of called free trade, lowering tariffs. What I want you to do is bunch up into your groups and come up with a 2 to 3 sentence response to this question. What solutions to the problems of mercantilism did the writers of the 1700s propose? How would countries be better off under those solutions? Okay, go ahead, like I said, bunch up into the groups you made, and just have one person, you know, pool your insight with each other, and write 2 or 3 sentences and give an answer. It'll take a few minutes, and send you guys out. I know a few of you came in after I took roll. What's your name? This is the syllabus. This is, and so kind
It's like chill. It's not.
They have
I don't know.
One of the things was that he was portrayed, like they wanted to put on so the product was like and then the tariffs for it's like, oh, okay, so even though it was the tariff for personally, I would prefer a cheaper, like a Pokemon plant across the ocean and bring it cheaper here. And then, point out that like, oh, it's like, there's no point for the tariff.
Yes, got it.
Emmanuel Sanchez?
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, it's a trade between the mother country and home.
financial harm and good.
Oh, right there. We just said making trades with.
But yeah, I don't know. Those whole securities, those states.
Don't like each other, but.
I look at it when, it look cool.
Natural
That's their solution, right? And then other countries, yeah. Want to go snowboarding? There's a little, I can just like, you can go down the hill. Always better. Is he good? Get rails and shit.
And how that, like, how benefits both, the medical and colony is that.
To push prejudice aside with other countries, is what they do in these laws, like the entire treaty. And they should stop pushing tariffs on
Because once again, that's what adds. And then they should let go of the colonies, the cost of keeping the colonies doesn't, yeah, it outweighs the benefits of having those colonies.
Okay, let's take another minute, and then I'll see what you folks have.
I mean, right now, think about it, because I mean, it's like,
Yeah. The oil from this, let's try to get it
That's what I'm thinking. I don't want to make it and be like redundant, like, you know? Try to word it different, but it's the same thing. That's good. I want to make it or who's a gangster. Industrial oil is really what it is.
But it becomes more or less with the ground. It's the oil, like, what
He
people
did.
found back in
Remember, he was
the,
the first.
what sparked it, was the spark.
Gangster, but he was a way.
When they found oil in Texas.
And it's not.
That's really the difference. That type of oil wasn't found until 2 million years after that.
I mean, just.
The civil, it is a lot of shit. That much scary.
For the title,
That's a good
being
one.
human, and it's like mercantism. Wow, that John Wesley talked about it.
30
For now, it's being human.
Okay, let's go ahead and see what you folks have, in the back.
Sometimes it goes through a very, very complicated planning process.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand, too. Oh, you were?
No.
No, you were not, okay. Okay, how about the group in the front? 2 to 3 sentences.
Okay, so we wrote, this was some of the solutions. It was better if the colonies were more independent, because that would benefit the colonies themselves a little bit more. And then we also wrote, that, them be more independent would save both countries more money. And then another one was, lowering tariffs, was more beneficial for both trading countries.
Okay, all right. Well, one example of lowering tariffs or whatever, after the American Revolution, England remained our biggest trading advisor governor. So, The only time a slave would be freed was for some good example like that, and even then, the master of the slaves wouldn't be the one doing it. It would be maybe a city council or a council of advisors, okay? So what this meant was, it was almost impossible for people in Virginia to free their slaves, okay? It is often the founding fathers that come from Virginia who were slave owners were often bashed. But again, we kind of need to keep in mind the penalty here was if you violate this law, that slave that you freed will the people where that ex-slave is freed are told to take up and sell that guy into slavery. Okay, so if you wanted to violate the law and free your slaves anyways, well, it wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to let that happen. Okay, so again, again, Wesley is saying, gee, it's bad enough that slavery exists in the American colonies, but you're adjusting the legal system to make it permanent and, make it even worse, okay? Now, George Washington, later on in the 1700s, at least for a short time, the state legislature said, okay, you can free your slaves in your will when you die. And so that's how Washington was able to do that. But for the most part, the state legislature would not allow, okay? All right, now the second section here, Wesley is he's basically in dialogue. Back in days when there were people opposed to slavery, but slavery was still legal, you had people like Wesley saying, hey, slavery is bad. Then you had other people saying, well, there are some good reasons for it, okay? So Wesley is dialoguing with these people who are pro-slavery people, okay? Let me read the italics, and then I'll have somebody read that paragraph F. Wesley argues against justifications of slavery based on the idea that the slaves were corrupt, wicked, and good for nothing, and also that it's okay because it's legal. Okay, can somebody grab that first paragraph F and what pages? I can read if,
I'll do it.
okay, thank you.
And what pains have you take? What methods have you used to reclaim them from their wickedness? Have you carefully taught them that they're in God, a wise, powerful, a merciful being, a creator of governor of heaven and earth? What he has appointed a day wherein he will judge created the world will take account of all our thoughts, words, and actions, that in the day he will reward every child or of man according to his work, that then the righteous shall inherit the kingdom prepared from them from the foundation of the world, and the wicked shall be cast into everlasting fire prepared for the evil and its angels. If you have not done this, if you have taken no pain or thoughts about the matter, can you wonder at their wickedness? What wonder if they should cut your throat? And if they did, whom could you take for it but yourself? You first acted the villain in making them slaves. Whatever you stolen them or bought them, you kept them stupid and wicked by cutting them off from all opportunities of improving either in the knowledge of virtue, and now you assign their wants of wisdom and goodness as a reason for using them worse than brute beasts.
Okay, all right, so Wesley here, again, he is a Christian preacher, and he's basically using arguments from the Bible, okay? He talks about how, the Bible says God will judge everybody according to their actions, on the day of judgment. And there's other, more specific verses. There's one in the New Testament where masters are told to be good to their slaves because they will be judged. There is a master in heaven who will judge them, okay? So he kind of, he's saying, again, there were pro-slavery people saying, you know what? these folks that we have enslaved, they're good for nothing, okay? Nothing good is ever gonna come of these people, so we may as well enslave them and at least, give them some sort of civilization or something like that, okay? And Wesley is dialoguing with those people, so he's saying, hey, wait a second, let's unpack your argument. You're saying these people are just so wicked that, you know, nobody can do anything with these folks. He says, okay, have you done anything to help uplift these people? Okay, and every slave state had laws banning teaching, reading, and writing. Okay, so Wesley is saying, wait a second, you know, you're saying you may as well enslave these people because, you know, they're never going to amount to anything. And he said, well, wait a second, you know, first of all, you hurt these people by either buying them from somebody else or actually kidnapping them. Okay, well, you know, they were kidnapped in some way to begin with. And he said that was a wrong. Then he says, at the end of that paragraph, by preventing these people from ever raising themselves up, keeping them from reading and writing, okay? You kept them in whatever, you know, bad state you turned them into. And now he's saying, now after abusing them and keeping them from reading and writing and learning and growing, now you're looking at their bad behavior and say, well, gee, you know, see what we mean? We have to keep, you know, these people enslaved. So again, Wesley is arguing with those people. And he's basically saying that the slave owners have turned their slaves into, you know, if they're actually going to say, yeah, there's bad behavior here, you know, he's saying, well, no, the slave owners are to be blamed for that, okay? He's saying, first of all, they should never have been enslaved, but even if they were, the masters could have tried to provide some sort of education so, you know, the people could grow up and you know, be, you know, what we would say normal human beings, you know, working and having families, et cetera, et cetera. So he's, you know, he wrote all that to dialogue with pro-slavery people, okay? Okay, last paragraph, the grand plea. Can somebody grab that? Okay.
The grand plea is they are authorized by law, but can law, human law, change the nature of things? Can it turn darkness into light or evil into good? By no means. Notwithstanding 10,000 laws, right is right and wrong is wrong still. There must still remain an essential difference between justice and injustice, cruelty and mercy. So that I would still ask, who can reconcile this treatment of the Negroes, first and last, with either mercy or justice?
Okay, so one argument, he says, pro-slavery people say is, well, hey, it's legal. Slavery is legal. And he says, hey, you know, let's think about that. The fact that humans have made something legal doesn't mean it's right or wrong, okay? Doesn't mean that it's right. The fact that something is a law, okay? He says, look, regardless if there's 10,000 laws on the record books, that doesn't make something right, okay? Right is still right, wrong is still wrong. So he's saying, hey, if you're, looking at two words, mercy or justice, how could you possibly look at slavery as, reconciling or not violating ideas of mercy or justice, okay? All right, as I've said, Wesley was a preacher in the First Great Awakening. He wrote against slavery. There was a leader in English Parliament, William Wilberforce, who was trying to get slavery banned in England, and Wesley wrote a letter to give him encouragement, okay? And then he wrote a pamphlet called Thoughts Upon Slavery. Wesley was not the only preacher in the First Great Awakening. There were others as well. In fact, let's see, one. Okay, George Whitefield, okay? George Whitefield was another preacher in the First Great Awakening, and Whitefield wrote what was called an open letter to the middle colonies. Middle colonies, not the deep south or the far north, but the middle mid-Atlantic, like Maryland, Virginia. And in this open letter, he said, think of all the people who have died in slavery. He said, their blood will cry out to God. for justice. And again, he was a preacher in the First Great Awakening. He was using biblical language. The first murder recorded in the Bible was that of Abel. Okay, Adam and Eve had some kids. Okay, and in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, Cain kills his brother Abel. And then, according to the book of Genesis, God is walking around and he says, "Oh, Cain, I see you. Where's your brother?" And if you've heard that phrase, "Am I my brother's keeper?" That was what Cain said. Why are you asking me? I don't know where my brother is. And then God says, "Well, hey, yeah, you tell me, you're not your brother's keeper." He says, "Well, the fact is, Abel isn't anywhere, is he? He's 6 feet under." And God says, his blood cries out, from the ground. So, it's a very evocative story of the first murder in human history, at least according to the Bible. And, it's if you can imagine this evocative language. We've seen all sorts of horror movies and things like that. Very little really impresses us that we see these days. But back then, this was like, wow, that if somebody is killed unjustly, their blood will cry out from the ground, Anyways, so George Whitefield used that language to say, hey, these are people who are being unjustly, persecuted. Okay, so again, the First Great Awakening, I don't want to say it was an abolition movement. No, I mean, their primary purpose was to preach, tell people that, their sins are forgiven, by, Jesus at the cross. But the big impact on society, regardless of what people believe about religion, was that a lot of these people said, hey, after, we've converted people to our religious viewpoints, they said, let's go ahead and try to reform society and, eliminate some of the wicked things that are going on, okay? And slavery was by far the biggest target, Often, history teachers and historians aren't too friendly towards these First Great Awakening preachers. One big argument is that they didn't create abolition societies. They just preached sermons. And that's true for the most part. But, I mean, again, these were preachers. They weren't political activists. And they kind of had another thing, which was promote a religious revival. But while they were doing that, they also said, hey, we need to stop this wicked thing of slavery over here. You're not going to have lots of people forming an abolition society unless they first think slavery is wrong, okay? And so these First Great Awakening preachers they laid a necessary foundation, okay? They convinced a lot of Americans, hey, slavery is bad. So then the next step is, okay, now that we, slavery is bad, okay, now what can we do about it? So again, I think it's kind of silly to criticize them. They went ahead and did the first step, which is opening people's eyes,
So they influenced the Union
Influenced
to the Civil War.
Yeah.
So they had an awakening, like the Union against the North.
Influenced the Union. Yeah.
To fight for.
These preachers were the 1700s. The Civil War wasn't until like 1860s.
Oh yeah, you're right.
But it was people like Wesley and whatnot that got people, especially in the North, thinking, hey, they've got a point. Why don't we, free our slaves? And when we covered the Revolutionary War, at least the northern part of our country went ahead and acted on these ideas. Okay.
Were there any other preachers close to that? When the slavery movement started, like to abolish it, that influenced any other preachers that you know of?
When we cover the 1840s, we will look at another preacher,
All right.
John Finney.
John Finney?
Yeah, Finney.
What was he
I
from?
said Charles, I'm sorry. The
All
last
right.
name Finney, Finney. Yeah, we're going to get some, we're going to see some of his work. And I'm not trying to say all the abolitionists were preachers. There were some who were not even Christians, but there were a fair amount who were. And so this is just kind of like one sample here, okay? Anyways, like I said, when we cover the Revolutionary War, we will see that at least the northern section of the country acted on these ideas, and now the South, of course, did not until they lost. They didn't until they were forced to after losing the Civil War. But the North, kind of said, hey, they've got a point. And so the northern states in the Union started abolishing slavery within their own states in the 1780s and 1790s. Okay, 9:43. Let's go and take a break now. And when that says 9:50, I'll go ahead and start. And we will look at the French and Indian War. We will see how it led to the French Revolution, the American Revolution.